You wake up, and the first thing you feel is this weight. Not physical weight, but something heavy settling on your chest before your eyes are even fully open. You don't want to see people today. Not because you don't love them. Not because something happened. But because being alone feels like the only thing that will let you breathe. And immediately, the guilt starts. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? Why do I need so much space when everyone else seems fine being around people all the time? But here's what they never told you. People who need alone time often have the deepest capacity for connection. They're not antisocial. They're not broken. They're not running away from intimacy. They're highly sensitive to stimulation. And solitude is how they process the world, how they recharge, how they make sense of everything they've absorbed. When you need alone time, it's not rejection of others. It's protection of self. It's your nervous system saying, I've taken in too much, and I need space to integrate it all. The people who need the most alone time are often the ones who feel the most deeply, who notice the most, who carry the most awareness of what's happening around them. And that awareness, that sensitivity, it's exhausting. It requires rest. It requires silence. It requires periods where there are no demands, no expectations, no need to perform or engage or be anything for anyone. So if you need alone time, if you crave it, if you feel guilty about it, stop. This is not a flaw. This is your system telling you what it needs to function well. Honor it. And while we're talking about things that feel wrong but aren't, let me ask you this. Have you ever been bothered by something completely normal? Someone chewing. Someone breathing loudly. The sound of a pen clicking. The way someone walks. The pitch of their laugh. Normal behavior. Behavior that doesn't bother anyone else. But it makes your skin crawl. It makes you want to leave the room. It makes you feel irrational and broken and like there's something fundamentally wrong with you for being bothered by something so small. Here's what they never told you. If normal behavior bothers you, it often means you're dealing with sensory processing sensitivity, or you're in a state of nervous system dysregulation. Your brain is processing sensory input more intensely than others. Sounds that other people filter out, you hear at full volume. Movements that other people don't notice, you track constantly. This isn't you being dramatic or difficult. This is your nervous system being hyper-aware. Often because it learned at some point that hyper-awareness equals safety. Maybe you grew up in an environment where you needed to monitor everything to stay safe. Maybe you developed this sensitivity as a survival mechanism. Or maybe you're just wired this way, born with a more sensitive nervous system. Either way, being bothered by normal behavior is information. It's telling you that your system is overloaded, that you need less stimulation, that you're operating in a state of high alert. And the solution is not to force yourself to tolerate what's intolerable. The solution is to reduce your overall stress load, to create more quiet in your life, to give your nervous system the space it needs to come down from high alert. Let's talk about overthinking. You're lying in bed and your mind is running through the conversation you had 3 days ago. What did they mean by that comment? Did you say the wrong thing? Are they upset with you? Should you reach out? Should you apologize? Should you explain? And the thoughts spiral and you can't shut them off and you're exhausted but you can't sleep because your brain won't stop analyzing and replaying and catastrophizing. Here's what they never told you. People who overthink usually have experienced situations where they needed to predict outcomes to stay safe. Your brain learned that thinking through every scenario, anticipating every possibility, analyzing every interaction was how you protected yourself. Maybe you had unpredictable parents. Maybe you experienced trauma. Maybe you learned that missing a social cue had consequences. Your overthinking is not a personality flaw. It's a coping mechanism that worked at some point, but now it's running on autopilot even when there's no real threat. Overthinkers are often incredibly intelligent, highly empathetic, deeply aware people whose brains are just working too hard to keep them safe from dangers that may not even exist. The path forward is not to stop thinking. It's to retrain your brain to recognize when you're problem-solving versus when you're ruminating. It's to develop the ability to notice the thoughts without getting swept away by them. It's to understand that your overthinking makes sense given your history, and you can have compassion for it while also working to change the pattern. Now think about crowds, concerts, malls, busy restaurants, networking events, places where most people go to have fun, to connect, to engage with life. and you feel nothing but dread. Your stomach tightens, your chest constricts. The thought of being in a packed space with noise and bodies and chaos makes you want to cancel, to stay home, to avoid it entirely. And people don't understand. They think you're antisocial, boring, missing out on life. But here's what they never told you. If someone avoids crowds, it means their nervous system is highly reactive to stimulation, and they're not being difficult. They're being honest about their capacity. Crowds are sensory overload. Too much noise, too many people, too much unpredictability, too much input all at once. For someone with a sensitive nervous system, a crowd is not exciting. It's overwhelming to the point of pain. Their brain is trying to process hundreds of stimuli simultaneously, and it can't filter effectively. And the result is anxiety, exhaustion, sometimes even physical symptoms like nausea or dizziness. This is not social anxiety, though it can look similar. This is sensory overwhelm, and forcing yourself into situations that overwhelm your system is not brave. It's harmful. It's re-traumatizing. The answer is not exposure therapy that pushes you past your limits. The answer is honoring your limits and finding ways to connect that don't require you to override your nervous system's very real needs. Here's another one. You feel everything. A movie makes you cry. A song breaks you open. Someone tells you a story, and you're feeling it with them, carrying their pain, holding their joy, experiencing their life as if it's your own. And you've been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You've been told to toughen up, to develop thicker skin, to stop taking things so personally. But here's what they never told you. People who feel too much are often the most emotionally intelligent, the most empathetic, the most capable of deep connection because they experience the full spectrum of human emotion without numbing or avoiding. Your sensitivity is not weakness. It's a profound capacity for feeling that most people never access. Yes, it means you hurt more. But it also means you love more. You experience beauty more intensely. You understand people more deeply. The problem is not that you feel too much. The problem is a world that's uncomfortable with feeling and wants you to be less so they can be more comfortable. But your depth of feeling is exactly what makes you capable of creating art, building meaningful relationships, understanding nuance, holding space for others. Don't let anyone convince you that your sensitivity needs to be fixed. It needs to be honored. And I need to pause here because if any of this is landing for you, if you're recognizing yourself in these patterns, I want you to leave a comment. Just something simple like, I need alone time to survive, or normal sounds drive me crazy, or I overthink everything, or crowds overwhelm me, or I feel too deeply. Because when you name it, when you claim it in the comments, you're not just validating your own experience. You're creating a moment of recognition for someone else who's been hiding the same thing. And that matters. That connection, that knowing you're not alone, it matters more than you realize. So go ahead. Leave that comment. I read every single one and I want to hear from you. Now let's talk about acting different. You show up differently in different contexts. At work, you're professional, contained, polished. With your family, you're quieter, more guarded, careful with your words. With your close friends, you're loose, silly, fully yourself. And someone notices. They say you're fake, you're putting on an act, you're not authentic because you're different in different spaces. But here's what they never told you. If someone acts different in different environments, they're not being fake. They're being adaptive and intelligent about which parts of themselves are safe to show in which contexts. This is called code switching. This is called social intelligence. This is recognizing that not all spaces can hold all of you and choosing wisely what to reveal where. The person who is exactly the same in every context is either incredibly privileged or incredibly unaware. Because most of us have learned through painful experience that certain parts of ourselves are not welcome everywhere. Certain emotions get punished. Certain behaviors get rejected. Certain aspects of our personality are too much for some people and not enough for others. So we adapt. We show the parts that will be received well, and we protect the parts that won't. This is not dishonesty. This is survival. This is wisdom. And anyone who judges you for it has probably never had to navigate spaces where being fully yourself was dangerous. Let me tell you something else they never told you. People who apologize constantly often grew up in environments where everything was somehow their fault. They learned that taking the blame, even for things they didn't do, was how you kept the peace, how you stayed safe, how you prevented conflict. So now, as adults, they apologize for existing, for taking up space, for having needs, for being human. Every sorry is not actually an apology. It's a flinch. It's a preemptive attempt to ward off criticism or anger or rejection. It's, I'm already making myself small, so please don't hurt me. And until you recognize this pattern, until you see that your constant apologizing is not politeness but a trauma response, you'll keep doing it. You'll keep shrinking. You'll keep making yourself smaller and smaller, trying to avoid a punishment that's not actually coming anymore. Here's another one. People who are always busy, who can't sit still, who fill every moment with activity and noise and distraction, are often running from something they don't want to feel. Busyness is a socially acceptable form of avoidance. It's a way to never be alone with your thoughts, to never face the emptiness or the pain or the questions you don't want to answer. We celebrate busy people. We admire their productivity, their hustle, their ability to do it all. But underneath the busyness is often exhaustion, anxiety, and a desperate need to outrun feelings that will catch up eventually. Because you can't run forever. At some point, the busyness stops working. At some point, you burn out or break down or find yourself in the quiet and realize you don't know who you are anymore because you've spent so long doing instead of being. People who struggle to accept compliments often have a deeply ingrained belief that they're not worthy of praise. When someone says something nice, their brain immediately rejects it. That's not true. They're just being nice. They don't really mean it. This comes from a childhood where accomplishments were minimized, where praise was conditional or absent, where nothing was ever good enough. So now, as adults, when someone recognizes them, celebrates them, sees their worth, it doesn't compute. It creates cognitive dissonance. Their internal narrative says I'm not good enough, and the external feedback says you are, and the brain chooses to believe the internal narrative because it's older, deeper, more familiar. Learning to accept compliments is not about arrogance. It's about allowing reality to update your outdated self-concept. People who give too much, who are always there for everyone else, who can't say no, who sacrifice their own needs to meet others' needs, are often repeating a pattern from childhood where their worth was tied to what they could provide. They learned that love is conditional, that being needed equals being valued, that if they stop giving, people will leave. So they give and give and give until they're empty, until they're resentful, until they realize they've built relationships where they're valued for what they do, not who they are. And the heartbreak of this realization, the grief of understanding that many of your relationships are transactional, it's devastating. But it's also the beginning of change. Because once you see the pattern, you can choose differently. You can start saying no. You can start asking for what you need. You can start testing whether people will stay when you stop performing. People who isolate when they're struggling often learned that their pain was unwelcome. They learned that being vulnerable led to shame or dismissal, or being told to get over it. So now, when things get hard, they disappear. They go silent. They handle it alone. Not because they want to, but because they don't believe anyone will actually show up for them. They've learned that asking for help leads to disappointment, so they stop asking. They've learned that showing weakness invites judgment, so they hide their struggles. And this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when they isolate, people assume they want space and don't reach out, which confirms their belief that no one cares. Breaking this pattern requires something terrifying. It requires reaching out when every instinct says to hide. It requires risking rejection to discover who will actually show up. Here's something they definitely never told you. People who hate small talk often crave depth and meaning in their interactions, and surface-level conversation feels like a waste of their limited social energy. They're not snobs. They're not antisocial. They're just highly aware that time is finite and energy is finite, and they'd rather have one deep conversation than 10 shallow ones. Small talk feels empty to them, performative, a social ritual that serves no real purpose. They want to know how you actually are, not the polite fiction of, I'm fine. They want to discuss ideas, emotions, meaning, purpose. They want connection that goes beneath the surface. And in a world that runs on small talk, that bonds over weather and sports and safe topics that require no vulnerability, they feel perpetually disconnected. They're surrounded by people but starving for real conversation. People who need constant reassurance often experienced inconsistent love or attention in childhood. One day they were praised, the next day ignored. One moment their parent was warm, the next cold. They never knew which version they'd get, so they learned to constantly check. Am I okay? Are we okay? Do you still love me? Are you mad? They're seeking the consistency they never had. They're trying to create predictability in relationships, because unpredictability feels dangerous. And this need for reassurance can exhaust partners, friends, anyone close to them. But the need is real. It's not manipulation. It's a nervous system that never learned to trust that love is stable, that presence is reliable, that someone can be upset about something unrelated, and it doesn't mean they're about to leave. People who laugh at inappropriate times often use humor as a defense mechanism against discomfort or pain. Something serious happens, and they laugh. Something sad occurs, and they make a joke. It's not that they don't care. It's that their nervous system doesn't know how to process intense emotion, so it defaults to humor because humor feels safer than feeling. This often develops in childhood when expressing real emotions was unsafe or unwelcome. Humor became the acceptable alternative. Sadness was met with dismissal, but making people laugh was rewarded. So they learned to perform comedy instead of expressing pain. And now, as adults, they're known as the funny one, the one who lightens the mood. But underneath the jokes is often profound sadness they've never learned to express directly. Let me tell you about perfectionism. People who are perfectionists are not simply detail-oriented or high-achieving. They're terrified of being seen as flawed, as failing, as not being enough. Perfectionism is not about excellence, it's about avoiding shame. It's about believing that if you can just be perfect enough, do everything right enough, achieve enough, then you'll finally be safe from criticism, from rejection, from the devastating feeling of not measuring up. But perfectionism is a trap, because perfect doesn't exist. So you're chasing something impossible, beating yourself up for falling short of an unattainable standard, living in constant anxiety about making mistakes. And the cost is enormous. Perfectionism prevents you from trying new things because you might fail. It prevents you from being vulnerable because you might be rejected. It prevents you from resting because there's always more you should be doing. It's exhausting, and it's often rooted in childhood experiences where mistakes had consequences, where love felt conditional on performance, where being enough required being perfect. People who seem confident but struggle with deep insecurity often learn to perform confidence as a survival strategy. They present as self-assured, capable, together, because showing uncertainty felt dangerous. Maybe they had parents who punished weakness. Maybe they were bullied and learned that appearing strong was protection. Maybe they were the oldest child and had to be the rock for everyone else. So they developed this polished exterior, this performance of having it all figured out. But inside, they're questioning everything. Inside, they feel like an imposter, like everyone will discover they're faking it, like they don't actually know what they're doing. This split between the confident exterior and the insecure interior is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, constant performance, constant fear of being found out. Here's something crucial. People who struggle to trust others often had early experiences of betrayal or abandonment that taught them people are unreliable. Maybe a parent left. Maybe a caregiver was inconsistent. Maybe someone they loved hurt them and never acknowledged it. So they learned that trusting people leads to pain. They learned that letting people close means giving them the power to hurt you. And now, as adults, they keep everyone at arm's length. They test people. They wait for the other shoe to drop. They sabotage relationships because leaving first feels safer than being left. And they know this is a problem. They know they're pushing people away. But the fear of being hurt again is stronger than the desire for connection. Healing this requires slowly, carefully learning that not everyone will betray you, that some people are actually trustworthy, that vulnerability is risky but the alternative is loneliness. People who have trouble making decisions often fear making the wrong choice more than they desire making any choice at all. They get paralyzed weighing options, considering outcomes, trying to predict which decision will lead to the best result. But here's the thing. Indecision is itself a decision. It's choosing to stay stuck rather than risk moving forward and potentially being wrong. This often comes from perfectionism, from a belief that there's one right answer, And if you can just think hard enough, you'll find it. Or it comes from having experienced consequences for wrong choices. So now every decision feels high stakes. But most decisions are reversible. Most choices are not life or death. And staying stuck, waiting for certainty that will never come, that's its own form of suffering. Let's talk about people who can't relax, who feel guilty resting, who turn relaxation into productivity by reading self-help books, or listening to podcasts, or planning the next thing. They can't just be. They can't just exist without purpose or output or achievement. This comes from having learned that your value is tied to what you produce, that rest is laziness, that you have to earn downtime through enough work. So they run themselves into the ground, and then feel guilty when their body forces them to stop. They get sick and feel like they're failing. They need a break and feel like they're weak. Rest is not a reward for productivity. Rest is a biological necessity. You don't have to earn the right to be tired. You don't have to justify needing to stop. Your body is not a machine, and treating it like one will break it. People who overshare often didn't receive enough attention or validation growing up, and now they're trying to be seen, to be heard, to matter to someone. They tell their whole life story to strangers. They reveal intimate details too soon. They can't seem to gauge appropriate levels of disclosure for different relationships. And people judge them as having no boundaries, as being attention-seeking, as being too much. But underneath the oversharing is often a desperate loneliness, a hunger to be known, a belief that if they can just tell you everything, maybe you'll understand them, maybe you'll stay, maybe you'll see their worth. The solution is not to shame them into silence. The solution is helping them find healthier ways to get their need for connection met. And while we're here, let me remind you about this channel. If you're connecting with this content, if you're finding yourself in these patterns, if you want more psychology that goes this deep, subscribe. This is what we do here. Every week, content that explores human behavior, that validates experiences the world dismisses, that helps you understand yourself better. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Become part of this community of people who are done pretending everything is fine and ready to do the real work of understanding themselves. And if this video is speaking to you, leave a like. It tells me this matters, that going deep into these topics is valuable, that you want more of this. Your engagement shapes what I create next. People who are always early often have anxiety about being late that's rooted in experiences where lateness had consequences. Maybe they had a parent who punished tardiness. Maybe they internalized the message that being late is disrespectful. Maybe they fear inconveniencing others or being judged. So now they arrive everywhere 15, 20, 30 minutes early and wait rather than risk being even a minute late. This anxiety about time is stealing their time. They're sacrificing their own hours to avoid the anxiety of potentially being late. And often the people they're meeting are chronically late themselves, which creates resentment. Early people resent late people for not valuing their time. Late people think early people are rigid and anxious, but both are operating from their own nervous system's needs and fears. People who hate asking for help often internalize the belief that needing others is weakness. They learn to be self-sufficient, to handle everything alone, to never burden anyone with their needs. Maybe they asked for help as a child and were met with impatience or rejection. Maybe they had to be the strong one, the caretaker, the one everyone else leaned on. So asking for help now feels like failure, like admitting they can't handle life, like revealing they're not as capable as they appear. But humans are not designed to function in isolation. We need each other. Asking for help is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's recognizing your limits and allowing others to support you. It's actually a form of trust and vulnerability that deepens relationships. People who say yes when they mean no often have a deeply ingrained pattern of people-pleasing that comes from believing their needs don't matter as much as others' needs. They agree to things they don't want to do. They show up for people who never show up for them. They sacrifice their time, energy, boundaries to keep others happy. And they resent it. They resent the people they're saying yes to. They resent themselves for not having the courage to say no. But the resentment doesn't stop the pattern because the fear underneath it is stronger. The fear that saying no means rejection, that setting a boundary means conflict, that prioritizing themselves means they're selfish. Learning to say no is learning that you matter as much as everyone else, that your time is as valuable, that disappointing someone is not the worst thing that can happen. People who replay conversations in their heads for days are not just overthinking. They're often trying to process something that felt off, something that triggered them, something their nervous system flagged as a potential threat. They're going back through it looking for what they missed, what they should have said differently, what the other person really meant. This is hypervigilance. This is a nervous system that's trying to protect you by analyzing past interactions to predict future ones. It makes sense if you grew up needing to read between the lines, needing to anticipate moods, needing to protect yourself from emotional landmines. But it's exhausting, and often the conversation they're replaying was fine. It's their nervous system's interpretation that's creating the problem. People who struggle with eye contact are not necessarily shy or dishonest. For many people, especially those with autism, ADHD, anxiety, or trauma, eye contact is overwhelming. It's too much intimacy, too much intensity, too much sensory input. Looking away is not avoidance, it's regulation. It's how they can actually listen to what you're saying instead of being overwhelmed by the intensity of direct eye contact. We've been taught that eye contact equals honesty and attention. But that's a cultural norm, not a universal truth. Some people connect better, listen better, engage better when they're not forced to maintain eye contact. People who cancel plans at the last minute are not always flaky or inconsiderate. Sometimes they're dealing with invisible illnesses, chronic pain, mental health struggles that fluctuate. Sometimes they overcommitted when they were feeling good and can't follow through when they're not. Sometimes their social battery runs out, and the thought of showing up and performing is too much. Yes, it's frustrating for the people who made plans with them. Yes, it impacts relationships. But there's often real suffering behind the cancellation. Real limits being hit. Real capacity being reached. The solution is not to push through anyway. The solution is being more honest upfront about your capacity and finding people who can handle uncertainty without taking it personally. People who need everything planned often experience chaos or unpredictability in childhood, and now crave control and structure as a way to feel safe. If your childhood was unstable, if you never knew what version of your parent you'd get, if your environment was chaotic, planning becomes a way to create the predictability you never had. It's not about being rigid. It's about reducing anxiety. It's about creating a sense of order and control in a world that often feels out of control. These are the people who have detailed schedules, backup plans, contingencies for their contingencies. And they get anxious when plans change, because change activates their old fear of instability. People who seem unemotional or detached often feel things very deeply, but learned that showing emotion was unsafe. Maybe expressing feelings led to punishment or mockery. Maybe they were told to stop being so sensitive. Maybe their emotions were used against them, so they learned to disconnect from their feelings, to present a calm exterior even when they're falling apart inside. This emotional suppression is not strength. It's a survival mechanism that comes at a cost. Because emotions don't go away when you ignore them. They just go underground. They manifest as physical symptoms, as numbness, as difficulty connecting with others, as a sense of being cut off from your own life. People who are extremely independent often had to be because no one was coming to help them. They learned early that they could only rely on themselves, that asking for help led to disappointment, that being needed by others was acceptable, but needing others was weakness. So now they pride themselves on not needing anyone, on handling everything alone, on being completely self-sufficient. But underneath the independence is often deep loneliness. A longing for someone they can actually depend on. A wish that just once, someone would show up without being asked. True strength is not never needing anyone. True strength is being able to be vulnerable enough to let people in. People who get intensely focused on projects or interests to the point of obsession often have minds that crave depth and mastery and don't do well with surface-level engagement. They're not interested in knowing a little about everything. They want to know everything about something. This intensity is not imbalance. It's how they engage with the world. It's how they find meaning and satisfaction. But it can create problems in relationships when they disappear into their obsessions and forget to maintain connection with people. It can create problems at work when they want to go deep, but the job requires breadth. Learning to honor this need for depth while also maintaining balance is the challenge. People who clean when they're stressed are using physical control of their environment as a way to cope with emotional or mental overwhelm. When everything feels chaotic internally, creating order externally provides a sense of agency and calm. It's not avoidance, though it can function as that too. It's regulation. It's their nervous system finding a way to settle by engaging in a task that has clear beginning, middle, and end, that produces visible results, that creates the order they crave. There are worse coping mechanisms, but if cleaning is the only way you know how to deal with stress, it's worth developing other tools too. People who remember every detail of past arguments or hurts often have a nervous system that stores perceived threats as a way to protect against future harm. Their brain is cataloging every time they were hurt, every time they were wronged, every time their trust was violated, not because they want to hold grudges, but because their survival mechanism is creating a database of danger to avoid. This makes forgiveness incredibly difficult, because forgetting feels like making yourself vulnerable to being hurt the same way again. Healing requires slowly building trust that you can remember what happened without needing to use it as ammunition, that you can acknowledge past pain without letting it dictate your present. People who talk fast often think fast, and if they don't get the words out quickly, they'll lose the thought. Their brain is making connections rapidly, and their speech is trying to keep up. This is not anxiety, though it can be. This is cognitive processing speed. And it can be frustrating for people who process more slowly, who need time to think before responding, who feel steamrolled by the fast talker's pace. But the fast talker is not trying to dominate. They're just existing in the speed their brain naturally operates at. Slowing down feels unnatural, forced, like trying to run in slow motion. People who need closure often struggle to move on from relationships or situations that ended without resolution. Their brain wants completion, wants answers, wants to understand what happened and why. Ambiguity is torture for them. Not knowing keeps them stuck, keeps them replaying, keeps them hoping for the conversation that will make everything make sense. But closure is not something someone else can give you. It's something you have to create for yourself. It's accepting that you may never get the answers you want and finding peace with the ambiguity anyway. People who are suspicious of kindness often experience manipulation disguised as care. They learn that niceness came with strings attached, that generosity was a setup for obligation, that when someone was too nice, they wanted something. So now genuine kindness triggers suspicion. What do they want? What's the catch? Why are they being so nice? This makes receiving difficult, makes trusting difficult, makes letting people in difficult. Because if kindness always had a price before, why would it be free now? Learning to receive without suspicion requires experiencing enough genuinely free generosity to update the old belief system. People who procrastinate are not lazy. They're often dealing with perfectionism, fear of failure, overwhelm, or executive dysfunction. The task feels too big, too difficult, too likely to reveal their inadequacy. So they avoid it. They do everything else. They know they're making it worse by waiting. They know they'll regret it. But the anxiety about starting is stronger than the anxiety about the deadline. Procrastination is not a time management problem. It's an emotional regulation problem. It's about not knowing how to manage the discomfort that comes with doing something challenging or exposing yourself to potential failure. People who need constant background noise often use it to drown out intrusive thoughts or to regulate their nervous system. Silence is not peaceful for them. Silence is when the thoughts get loud, when the anxiety rises, when they're alone with themselves in a way that feels uncomfortable. So they always have music playing, always have the TV on, always have a podcast running. The noise is not distraction, or rather, it is distraction, but necessary distraction. It's how they cope with an internal environment that's too loud, too chaotic, too overwhelming without the external input to focus on. People who are intensely private often grew up in environments where their privacy was violated or their personal information was used against them. Maybe parents read their diary. Maybe family members gossiped about their business. Maybe sharing something led to judgment or shame. So they learn to keep things close, to reveal very little, to maintain walls that protect their inner world. This can look like being closed off or distant, but it's self-protection. It's wisdom earned through painful experience. Trust for them is not given easily. It's built slowly, carefully, and can be destroyed in an instant. People who give advice they don't follow often know intellectually what they should do, but can't bridge the gap between knowing and doing. It's easy to see clearly when it's someone else's life. It's easy to be rational and objective when you're not drowning in the emotions of the situation. But when it's your own life, when it's your own pain, when it's your own fear, all that clarity disappears. Knowing what you should do and being able to do it are two completely different things, and the gap between them is filled with trauma, fear, unmet needs, and nervous system dysregulation that makes the logical choice feel impossible. Here's something they never told you about anger. People who rarely show anger often learned that anger was dangerous or unwelcome, and now they suppress it until it manifests as depression, passive aggression, or sudden explosive rage. Anger is a healthy emotion that signals boundaries are being violated, needs are not being met, something is wrong and needs to change. But many people learned that expressing anger led to punishment, abandonment, or escalation. So they swallowed it. They turned it inward. They became the target of their own anger because directing it outward felt too risky. Learning to express anger in healthy ways requires first giving yourself permission to feel it, to acknowledge it, to see it as information rather than something to fear. People who constantly compare themselves to others often have a fragile sense of self-worth that's dependent on external validation and relative positioning. They can't feel good about their accomplishments unless they're better than someone else's. They can't be happy with what they have unless it's more than what others have. This is exhausting, and it's a trap, because there will always be someone with more, someone better, someone further ahead. Comparison kills contentment. It makes joy conditional on superiority, and it's often rooted in childhood experiences where love or approval was competitive, where siblings were pitted against each other, where your value was determined by how you measured up to others. People who have a hard time receiving compliments, gifts, or help often believe they don't deserve good things. Somewhere along the way, they internalize the message that they're not worthy, not enough, not deserving of kindness or generosity. So when someone offers something nice, their brain rejects it. It feels wrong. It creates discomfort. They deflect, minimize, refuse, or immediately try to reciprocate to even the score. Learning to receive is learning that you're worthy just because you exist, not because of what you do or how much you give. It's allowing yourself to be cared for, to be seen, to matter without having to earn it. People who are chronically late often have a different relationship with time than punctual people and struggle with time perception, transition times, or saying no to requests that make them late. They're not trying to be disrespectful. They're not trying to communicate that your time doesn't matter. They genuinely believe they have time when they don't. They underestimate how long things take. They overestimate how quickly they can move. They say yes to one more thing before leaving. And then they're late. Again. And they feel terrible about it. But the pattern persists because changing it requires fundamentally changing how they relate to time. And that's harder than it sounds. People who are brutally honest often value truth over kindness and may not realize the impact of their words on others. They see honesty as the highest value. They think they're doing you a favor by telling you the hard truth. They don't understand why people get upset when they asked for honesty and got it. But honesty without compassion is cruelty. Truth can be delivered with kindness. Feedback can be given with care. And sometimes the most honest thing is recognizing that your opinion wasn't asked for and isn't needed. People who pride themselves on brutal honesty often need to examine whether they're being truthful or just being brutal. People who need to be needed often confuse being helpful with being lovable. They derive their sense of worth from what they can do for others. They're the fixers, the helpers, the ones who are always available. But underneath this generosity is often a fear that if they stop being useful, they'll be abandoned. That their value is in what they provide, not who they are. This creates unbalanced relationships where they give far more than they receive and then resent the people they've taught to depend on them. Learning to be valued for who you are rather than what you do requires risking that some people will leave when you stop performing, and some will. And that's painful but necessary. People who intellectualize their emotions often feel safer in their heads than in their bodies. They can analyze their feelings, explain them, understand them cognitively, but they struggle to actually feel them. This disconnect between head and heart often develops as a coping mechanism when feeling was too painful, too overwhelming, too dangerous. So they learn to think about feelings instead of feeling them. They learn to observe themselves from a distance instead of inhabiting their own experience. But emotions need to be felt, not just understood. They need to move through the body. And staying in your head all the time creates a sense of disconnection from yourself and from life. People who struggle with authority often had experiences where authority figures were unjust, abusive, or untrustworthy. They learned that power gets abused, that rules serve the powerful, not the people, that blindly following authority leads to harm. So now they question everything, resist control, challenge unfair systems. This can look like being difficult or oppositional, but it's often a healthy skepticism born from painful experience. Not all authority deserves respect. Not all rules deserve following. And people who refuse to comply without question are often the ones who create change, who stand up to injustice, who refuse to participate in systems that harm. People who apologize for things that aren't their fault often carry a deep sense of responsibility for other people's feelings and experiences. If someone is upset, they feel like they caused it, like they should fix it, like they need to make it better. This hyper-responsibility often comes from childhood roles, where they were blamed for things beyond their control, where they were made to feel responsible for a parent's emotions or the family's dysfunction. So now they apologize reflexively, constantly, for existing, for having needs, for other people's bad moods. Learning to distinguish between what's actually your responsibility and what you've been conditioned to take on is crucial for breaking this pattern. People who sabotage good things often don't believe they deserve them. When something good happens, a great relationship, a good job, real happiness, their nervous system doesn't recognize it as safe. Good things feel unfamiliar, dangerous even, because their brain has been wired to expect pain, disappointment, abandonment. So they sabotage. They push people away. They quit before they're fired. They create the ending they expect because waiting for it is more painful than causing it. Healing this requires slowly building tolerance for good things, for staying present when things are going well instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for believing that maybe, just maybe, you deserve good things too. People who are defensive often interpret feedback as attack because somewhere in their history, criticism was delivered with contempt, anger, or rejection. They learned that feedback meant you're wrong, you're bad, you're not good enough. So now even gentle, constructive feedback activates their defense mechanisms. They can't hear what's being said because they're too busy protecting themselves from the shame they anticipate. This makes growth difficult because they can't receive information about how to improve without feeling like they're being torn apart. Learning to separate feedback from identity, to hear suggestions without hearing you're worthless, requires rewiring deep patterns. And as we close this out, I want you to understand something fundamental. Every single pattern we've discussed, every behavior, every tendency, every response, it all makes sense. It all developed for a reason. Your nervous system is not broken. It's adapted. It's doing exactly what it learned to do to keep you safe, to help you survive, to navigate a world that often didn't make space for you as you are. The behaviors that cause you problems now, they served a purpose once. They protected you. They got you through. And your nervous system is still running those programs even though the threat might be gone. Healing is not about judging these patterns as wrong or broken. It's about recognizing them, understanding where they came from, having compassion for the part of you that developed them, and then slowly, gently, teaching your nervous system that it's safe to respond differently now, that you don't need to fawn to be safe, that you don't need to fight to protect yourself, that you don't need to freeze to avoid harm, that you don't need to flee to survive. You can choose different responses now, but that choice requires awareness, patience, and deep self-compassion. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are not wrong. You are a human who learned to survive in whatever environment you found yourself in, and you did the best you could with what you had. Now you get to do something different. Now you get to heal. Now you get to update those old programs. Now you get to become who you actually are underneath all the protective mechanisms. And that is the most important work you will ever do.